one of the key things as a technique is just to take a deep breath and just to spend that little bit less time talking, because when I'm nervous, I talk more, and when I'm relaxed, I listen more. And I think things go a lot better when I spend more time listening than talking.
There are some people out there who just tick all the boxes when it comes to communication skills. They can write articles and blog posts eloquently and articulately. They can stand up on stage and deliver a riveting TED Talk in front of hundreds of people. And they can confidently introduce themselves to strangers at parties. My next guest, Weh Yeoh, is one such rare individual who seems to do all of those things and more effortlessly. Now, being an exceptional communicator has no doubt helped Weh with the huge amount of non-profit work he does, including helping kids to get over debilitating speech difficulties. But what caught my eye about Weh when I first met him is how welcoming and warm he is to almost everyone he meets, how open he is when sharing details about his life, things many people would be shy or even terrified of admitting, and how robust and fearless he is in expressing his opinions whenever he feels strongly about something. In fact, when Weh was invited to do a TED Talk a couple of years back, he chose to talk about a subject that many would consider too sensitive to voice openly, something which no doubt we'll talk about. When he's not making controversial arguments on the world stage, though, Weh likes to constantly challenge himself to improve his communication skills. And his latest venture could be the most challenging one yet. He's learning to do stand-up comedy. I've invited Weh onto the Alchemy of Writing podcast today to learn more about his advanced communication skills, and in the hope that we might too imbibe some of those talents. Welcome, Weh, to the Elite Writers Lounge.
Hi, Shani. Thank you so much. Well, it's fair to say that I learned from the best. What an intro.
So, Weh, you're what I would call a natural when it comes to communicating. You speak fluently, eloquently, and also very confidently, both one-to-one, in small groups, and in front of big audiences, where you seem equally comfortable. Tell me, is it all one big act, or are you really as relaxed about it as you seem?
Well, that would give away the trade secret, Shani. Sorry, I can't do that. No, I'm kidding. For me, my number one value, most important value, is authenticity. So it doesn't matter how awkward the conversation is or whether or not people want to hear certain things, and that's gotten me in hot water over time. But it's very important for me to treat you absolutely the same as I would treat a philanthropist, a donor, a board member, a member of parliament, someone in a village in Cambodia, a student, an intern. It's all the same to me. So I think once I realized that was something really important to me, I just continued along that line. And now it's very difficult for me to fake it. So I guess to answer the question, it is not an act, I believe. It's me actually being myself. One of the other things that I've learned a lot about communication is that it's really hard to fake it. Not only is it really hard, it's just really tiring. So it's much easier just to be yourself. It comes back to that Oscar Wilde quote of be yourself, everybody else is taken. And I really like that quote. And I'll just add a little addendum to that. It should be yourself and embrace your weirdness because everybody else is taken. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about the process of getting older and filling in your own boots is you embrace all the weird parts of your personality and you're not afraid to let it shine.
You mentioned authenticity. How do you find that authenticity? I mean, is it something you monitor and see? Because, there is a temptation or a tendency to fake it at times. Is it something you had to develop, or was it just like a decision that you had to make and then after that it was all fine?
It's hard to pinpoint it on one moment, but I think it was me being comfortable with who I am and being really comfortable in my own skin and also not needing to impress anybody. There was actually one moment, I remember it was a friend of mine who I used to go to school with, and he knew me throughout my 20s. Then we sort of lost contact. And then in my early 30s, we regained contact again. And he said to me something after a few months of becoming friends again, which was, when you're in your early 20s, you're really hard to be around because I always got the impression that you were trying to be someone else. But now that you're at this stage of your life, you seem to just want to be who you are. And it's so much easier. And I think that's so fundamental and so simple in that simplicity. People want to connect to a real person, not some polished Instagram influencer type ideal of what we think it should be like. but just a real vulnerable person.
And that takes all the pressure off, doesn't it? But so did something happen that triggered that shift for you? Do you remember when and where you decided, okay, I'm not going to try and be anybody else anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long process, but it's funny you asked. It's a great question. It's funny you asked the question because I can actually pinpoint this moment when I was in my early 20s and I asked myself a question, which was, if I wasn't me, would I be friends with myself? And I couldn't really answer it. And along those lines, a sort of tangent, it was, what am I passionate about and what are my hobbies? And again, I couldn't really answer what that was. So what I did at the time was I packed up all my belongings, left them at my parents' house, and then I went traveling with no end date. And it ended up being 2 years that I did in Asia through China, India, Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Japan, so many, Malaysia, tons and tons of countries. And it's almost cliche to think about that I was finding myself, but I was mostly just having a good time and then learning a little bit about who I was. And then I guess when I came back, I was more sure of that person.
And so before that, was there a time when, it's hard to imagine now, but was there ever a time when you were just a shy and sheepish little boy?
Yeah, actually, I was actually exactly that, Shani. And I wouldn't be surprised if you were too, just as a hunch.
Yes.
In school, I was very shy. I was very obedient. As you mentioned, I'm sort of starting to dip my toes into stand-up comedy. And I think writing comedy and being part of that is a very clear form of rebellion. And there was no way that I would have done anything like that in school because I was just too straight, too predictable, and wanted to fit in too much. And I think a little bit of trying to be somebody else, trying to form that impression. But of course, at that age, you don't really know who you are. And certainly now, if I look back, that's a lot of the fundamentals of that person is still there, but it was just the way that it was expressed is very different.
So you mentioned that you no longer feel the need to impress people when you're communicating. And I think, all really good communicators have that same attribute. They don't feel that need to impress. Where does that need to impress come from?
I often wonder whether or not people who try to be something different and to fake it don't have a strong enough feeling of self-love. It comes back to that idea, but you can't really love other people if you don't actually love yourself first. And I think for me, that has been a bit of a struggle throughout my life, that to feel like I'm worthy of love. But I've certainly embraced that idea more and more as I get older. And I think it comes back to that thing again about embracing your weirdness, not just embracing all of those qualities of your personality, which are lovely and promote really well on LinkedIn and Instagram and so on, but the things that are really dark and the things that are just a bit ugly. You have to love all of those things. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't feel like such a big deal to be so revealing of who you are to other people.
Is it necessary that you share all those darker aspects with other people, or is it just enough to know them for yourself? Because maybe it's not something that you need to or want to share.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary for everyone, and it's not necessary for every audience. So, for example, if you're sitting in a board meeting or sitting with investors or philanthropists, you might not want to share your bowel habits, for example. But it definitely makes you more relatable. So, whatever you're comfortable with. Interestingly enough, coming back to stand-up, and I think stand-up is a wonderful way to explore the art of communication. But coming back to stand-up, when I was learning stand-up earlier this year, my teacher always had the same bit of feedback for me, which was that I didn't actually share enough about myself. He said, I want to know how you're thinking. I want to know what you're feeling. And everything that I was saying was more from a generic point of view. So his point was that it actually became less relatable. So clearly in that domain, I've got more work to do in being more comfortable with sharing my own story and perspective.
Right. And it seems like an ongoing journey, but you do find that people who are more willing to share more and be more vulnerable tend to be more interesting as well. And that kind of helps you to make friends and connections, right?
I think so. I think being vulnerable is really important. And that's something that I'm learning also as a leader and have a long way to go in that regard, because my previous, experience of being a leader has usually been the one to be the rock, to be the strong one at all times, even when things are really tough, as they usually are. That's the most common setting, things being really hard when you're starting something. And
Yeah.
so I'm learning a little bit more and more about how to be vulnerable with my team and inviting them in. Because the thing is that if you're not vulnerable with your team, A, they can't connect, but B, they can't help you. So
Mm,
you have no right to then sit around and go, oh, why is it so hard? And why am I doing this all by myself? And why
mm.
aren't people sharing their load? Well, you haven't let them in. So that's been a challenge for me and something I'm still working on.
And I think this is what must be key to the way that you seem very relaxed when doing a lot of things. Of course, some things must still make you nervous,
Mm.
but I wondered, say in the context of just say approaching strangers at a networking event, say, um, I'd like to know like what are the feel. You obviously look really comfortable with it, but do you still feel a little bit of nerves like most people do when they have to approach a stranger and start a conversation with them?
I don't think if it's a complete stranger, no, that's not really an issue. If it's somebody who I know I probably should impress, like
Mm,
a member of parliament or someone like that, for sure. Like anybody else, there are those sorts of nerves. So I think that's
mm,
quite natural. But I think one of the things about that is that it is to learn to firstly enjoy the experience when it's someone that's really big and powerful and impressive. Perhaps is it can be very easy to think too much about what they think about you and actually not
mm,
just enjoy the experience in the moment. And if it's
mm,
someone who's a complete stranger, I don't really feel very any anxiety really about talking to complete strangers because I just see them as the same as me. We all have that
mm.
internal struggle with ourselves, and different people show it in different ways. So I just see them as human beings like me.
Mm. When you are kind of approaching someone, say a stranger,
Mm.
you don't then get any of that negative self-talk that many people. I mean, this really is a problem for some people where they'll be thinking, "Oh, these people don't want to talk to me. I'm just annoying them. What if I run out of things to say?" Those kinds of anxieties that exist, and you're saying you don't really feel that. It sounds like you're not really thinking much before you do that. You're not kind of giving it over to your mind, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean that's the secret to life, not thinking, Shani. Maybe it's not overthinking. Maybe that's part of it. But
Yes.
I'm definitely not thinking about those negative thoughts. They haven't entered my mind at all. But it's
Mm,
more about being really open to what the conversation could be about, and not trying to premeditate what it should be about. There's a
mm,
really great quote by a lady called Kathy Salit, Salit, and it's from a book called To Sell is Human by Dan Pink. And she has this thing about listening, which she says, listen without listening for anything. And I really like that quote because it's about being a really open book. And so it's very easy when you see someone to start to put them in categories and say, oh, this person's probably going to talk about this, will probably not like to talk about this. But you obviously are often very surprised. Your first impressions are
mm,
usually wrong. So I think
mm.
trying to come in with that really blank slate and really listening to see what it is that they're saying and then letting the conversation go where it wants to go.
Right, and it seems that that's the constant theme here of a good communicator like you is that you're very relaxed. You're doing a lot of letting go. I'm not trying to force the conversation. It doesn't matter if it goes this way or that way. I'm not trying to impress. I'm not trying to, and you're kind of like just going in there with that complete letting go attitude and letting and just seeing how things run.
Yeah, and I think that's really key when you think about what is it about other people when they communicate with you in an interpersonal setting. What do good communicators leave you with the impression of? That's sort of the base that I started at. And I've had the good fortune to talk to a couple of really great, they both happen to be women, I think about it, and both are politicians. And I'm thinking about particular settings where we were in a busy room, there were people milling around and networking around, and I felt like this person was talking to me as if I was the only person in the room. And they
Mm,
left me with this impression that I was the most important to them for that, most important person to them for that period of time at least. And I think when I think about that, I think about, okay, well, what does it take for me to make that impression on someone else? Because I think that's what we really want, right? As human beings, we want to feel like we're heard. We want to feel
mm,
like we're valued. And so part of that is coming in with an empty slate. I think part of it is just really listening to what they're saying and really concentrating and not worrying, letting go of the FOMO, the fear of missing out on another conversation that could
mm.
possibly be better. Who knows? Just being focused just for that couple of minutes with that person. And it makes all the difference.
So, being a great communicator is as much about being a great listener as it is about being a great talker.
Oh, it's more about being a great listener, in my opinion. I think,
Mm.
out of the four, we've talked about this before, Shani, out of the four types of communication, reading, writing, speaking, listening, in the average day, you do more of the listening by a long way, I would say, if you totaled up the minutes spent doing those four things.
Mm.
And yet listening is the one out of the four that we actually don't teach at school. I find that really interesting. But listening is the one that has the most potential to um, improve your communication simply by the fact that it's the longest. But also, I think it's because it's the one where people are probably the worst at. I think that's
Mm.
reasonable. So if you become a mediocre listener, you're probably ahead of most people. If you become an excellent leader, you're miles ahead of most people.
So you said you don't mind being vulnerable. So let me ask this question: when we talked about negative self-talk, one of the kind of settings where people find this particularly difficult is in a dating context, where they have to kind of be out on a date with someone or approach a person who they're interested in. Um, does that negative self-talk come in some settings, say like that, where you do want to impress someone?
Similar to that example that I said about the politician or someone that you think you need to impress in a professional setting, it's the same thing. As soon as the stakes go up, you start to feel more nervous, you get the butterflies in the stomach, and that's perfectly normal. I think I'd be questioning whether or not I was human if I didn't feel that. But I
So
guess
how do you respond to that when you feel those things? And it doesn't stop you, I guess, from doing what you want to do.
no, I think what tends to happen is my mind tends to jump and make assumptions. Like, for example, this person's not interested in listening to me, or this person may be boring, or whatever. But they're probably as nervous as I am, right? So I think that one of the key things as a technique is just to take a deep breath and just to spend that little bit less time talking. Because when I'm nervous, I talk more, and when I'm relaxed, I listen more. And I think things go a lot better when I spend more time listening than talking. So just take that little bit of time to actually listen to what the person is saying, and um, also to ask good questions, much like your questions, Shani. And of course, as a journalist, you know the value of good questions, but the
Mm.
answers that you get are often only as good as the questions you ask, right? So if you ask better questions, you're going to get better answers.
So what are some deeper questions or good questions? I mean, the classic boring ones are kind of like, yeah, what do you do? How did you get here? That kind
Yeah.
of stuff. How do you move from those? Because you have to break the ice. You can't just go in there and ask someone, about their personal life. How typically do you get to kind of the more interesting stuff?
I mean, it's interesting that you say you can't jump straight in there. I remember reading this article a while ago about, I think it's called "The Death of Small Talk," and when I read it, I felt like crying, tears of joy, because I absolutely abhor small talk in all its forms. Talking about the weather or the weekend, and you can only do it so many times. And I think part of that is because I have this real desire to go deep, and I find the deep conversations much more enriching, and I sort of maybe impatiently want to get straight to the deep. But in terms of getting deep with people early, of course, it's a give and a take thing where you've got to be vulnerable enough to also show them that you're
Mm,
willing to go deep and be vulnerable yourself. But
mm,
one of the things I always come back to with people when I say, if they're saying, "Oh, I've run out of things to say," there is one question which never gets tired, and that's why. It's the why question. It's that Simon Sinek question about, well, why did you do that? And I think, what made you want to do that, which is a why question, and
mm,
then potentially getting in a bit of the how. So let's say I meet someone at a networking event and I know nothing about them except for the fact that they work for the US Embassy. Straight away, there's one question: what made you start working for the US Embassy, or why did you think this would be a good choice for your career? And then we'll go from there.
Excellent advice. Yeah, absolutely. And that follows. It's not so much a tactic or a technique, although you can use it like that. But it also comes from a genuine curiosity,
Mm,
right? I mean, that's
yeah.
what you want to know. You want to know deeper about people's motivations, I guess.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is genetic or learned. And I remember as a child that my dad, who used to work for Westfield as an executive, he's the kind of guy that he's the annoying dad, basically. Shani is the annoying dad that everybody wants to leave, and he's there hanging around talking to the cleaners, just
Mm.
chatting and getting information from them. And he used to say that a lot of the best information he got working as an executive was from talking to the cleaners, because they see it on the ground. So I don't think
Mm.
it was that calculating. I do think genuinely he was interested in them. And for me, it is kind of the same. I'm genuinely interested to know a little bit more about the person I'm talking to that goes beyond how their weekend was or what they think about the weather.
Mm-hmm. And that's from the point of view of asking people questions. But when people ask you questions, that's also an interesting dynamic as well, right? Because you can be less or more giving in terms of your answer. And I think a lot of people struggle if someone asks them, oh, where do you live? Might just say, oh, I live here, right? But I imagine that if someone asks you the question, where do you live? You might embellish it somewhat or give it some depth. Not embellish, that's the wrong word, but make it a bit more of an interesting answer, because there's a kind of a generosity there in terms of not just giving people one word answers.
It's funny that you use that example. It's funny you mentioned that, because I actually do have an embellishment, because it's just a kind of silly, meaningless, but kind of funny one, which is I usually say I live in the cultural and geographical epicenter of Sydney, and then I say the suburb, and then that always starts a conversation from there. So I think it sounds a little bit trite. It sounds a little bit trite, perhaps, but it's helpful. I mean, I think just to be a little bit different.
And it's generous as well, because you're giving something for other people to hold on to latch onto, and to move forward with, right?
And it's
If you
funny
just gave the place.
It's funny that you mentioned that, hold on to something, because I think that's the other thing when people have conversations where, let's say predominantly they're the ones asking the questions, they don't go deeper. So I might ask, for example, someone might ask a question about, what you said, where do you live? And then someone said, cultural and geographical epicenter of Sydney, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll go, oh, okay, cool, what do you do? And then they move on. But as you mentioned, there's a little nugget there that they might want to go a bit deeper on if they want to. To sort of say, oh, tell me why you think it's a cultural, what culturally is significant about it.
Yeah, you've given them something to move forward with, and I think those are good answers. If you can get good at the talking side of things, which is to answer questions in an interesting and generous way, then I think you end up becoming a better communicator, and then people really want to explore you a bit more too.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, right? When we think about, well, what makes someone interesting? One of the things probably is being different, as opposed to run of the mill. So that's the first thing, and I think you can put flavor into your answers that way. Another example would be when someone says, where they might say something like, "Were you born in Australia?" So I could answer that question by saying, "Yep," or I could answer the question by saying what they probably really are asking, which is, yes, I was, but my great-grandparents came from China and my parents came from Malaysia.
Yeah.
So I know that's probably what they're asking. So just giving that little bit more detail. But the second thing in terms of being interested is, interesting is being interested. I really like that quote as well. The most interesting people are interested, have a genuine interest in finding out other people's information and what makes their mind tick.
And I think, but what stops some people from doing that is because they think that many people out there think that if they ask to the things they're really interested in, it's going to alienate the person and they're not going to like them, or they're going to feel that it's too imposing. Where do you draw that line? Because I think that line is a lot further away than people think. Because I often end up having really interesting conversations with people. As a journalist, maybe that's why I'm trained to ask questions. And I know that sometimes I might be crossing the line, but very rarely. Usually it just opens up a beautiful, vault of communication. And have you found that too? Like it's okay to, people shouldn't think too much that, okay, this is going to be too imposing because I'm asking them where they live, or, something even more personal than that.
I 100% agree. You can always preface it by saying, you don't need to tell me, of course, which they know. But the reality is they don't need to tell you. So it's always up to them to sort of say, actually, I prefer not to talk about that. And that's what a respectful adult conversation is about. I think the line is when that happens, and it differs from people to people, or when someone throws wine in your face. That's probably where the other line is.
Yeah. But you rarely get that. You find that people are really just find it a great relief when they can end up talking about things that go beyond the surface. And most people actually want to, they just don't know how to necessarily get there. So you can play your part in showing them that I'm okay with going there.
Yeah, and that vulnerability side, coming back to that, from my point of view, is really important. And there are a few people in my life that are really great friends where we were hanging out for a while, and then all of a sudden one of us took that leap to become vulnerable. And we actually had a conversation about it after it, where we said, was it not for that moment, we probably wouldn't be friends now. We'd probably just, yeah, we're having a great time together, but that's not quite enough. So that vulnerability is what makes you human.
Mm. And talking of friends, you once mentioned that you knew somebody who has a remarkable communicating ability, that he always ends up making the person he's talking to feel better about themselves. Was it something like that? Do you know someone of that kind?
Spot on. I won't out him by name because he'll probably get embarrassed, but
Mhm.
he is a master communicator, and his job is in philanthropy, and he works with a lot of high net worth individuals. And so it's just perfect. And I think what it is about this person that strikes me as remarkable is exactly what you said. You can feel terrible before you speak to him, but you'll feel like $1,000,000 when you walk away from him. Part of that is his genuine interest in you. Part of it is the way in which he makes you feel great by, giving you compliments or being genuine and saying you did really well there. But there's something quite intangible. I've often tried to wonder what it is about this person that works really well. I think also he is a very emotionally intelligent man. He also happens to be gay. I wouldn't be surprised if that is something that's working in his favor, because he can accommodate the masculine parts of his personality and the feminine parts really comfortably together in one human being, and that makes his communication exceptional.
And when you watch him communicating, is there? Well, you mentioned this kind of this feminine and masculine side. Do you think what he does and how he does it is something that could be copied, or have you had any success with making people feel that way as well, or do you try to, or what?
I probably would have to ask to a survey, but I've
Mm,
certainly learnt a lot and tried to emulate some of the things that he does. And he's very genuine. That's the other thing, And I think we started off the podcast by talking about that genuine love
mhm,
of other people. You really don't feel, when he says a compliment about you, he doesn't feel put on. It feels like it's coming from a genuine place within his heart. And I think that's
mhm.
something that is very brave to do. And it's very brave to tell people actually how much you admire them and how much you love them. It feels
Yeah.
awkward the first time you say it, I think. But
Yes.
I've just learned over the years that once you do that, you open up this huge world of possibilities.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm pretty liberal with my compliments. When I see something about someone that I like, and I say, this is something that I really admire in you, and yeah, it cheers them up, and but there's nothing fake or inauthentic about it. It's just me expressing what I was thinking, and it might be seen as kind of going too far in some cases, but most people really welcome that feedback, and they don't often get it, so they don't even know that this thing that you're complimenting them on is something that is really admirable.
Hmm. I wonder if that feeling of going too far comes from our British heritage as well. That there's this kind of awkwardness around being too exuberant, which is certainly not a
Mm,
problem in a lot of other cultures. Let's say Latin American. I mean, just to stereotype a little bit.
mm,
It's this kind of idea about, oh no, we don't want to get into that. And again, it comes back a lot to, I think, your upbringing, maybe genetics. Where in my family it was very common for our love and care for other people to be proclaimed. It wasn't something that we held back on. So the words were always there.
Interesting. And so we looked at conversations, really. So the importance of listening, the importance of being open when talking. And but another big feature of being a good communicator is being able to tell stories. And I
Mm.
find that having that ability, maybe as a journalist, used to telling stories, so it comes quite naturally to me. But then recently, only I discovered when people sort of played that back to me and said, "Oh, I wish I could tell stories like you do." And then you realize that there's a lot of people out there who really value that ability to tell stories, but they find that they're not they just don't know how to do it. In your mind, how important to communicating well is being able to tell stories?
Oh, so important, Shani. Is it's so important. It's the crux of everything that you do. So to give you one example, see, I'm telling a story to use to illustrate my point. But to use one example, I was in a pitch meeting for Umbo, which is a social enterprise that I'm working on now, and we were
Mm,
talking to a bunch of angel investors. And there was one throwaway, and obviously you present all the statistics about the business and the market size and the case studies and blah, 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 quite heavy with information. So I tried a little bit of storytelling in there. And I told one, and by the way, the social enterprise focuses on online delivery of health services, otherwise known as telehealth. So I told a story of me walking through the Art Gallery of New South Wales while calling my GP. And I said, I wonder why I would ever want to go back to sitting in a wait room for 45 minutes reading New Idea from the 90s. And that was one story that stuck in their head because it was repeated back to me at the end of it. And, again, it took me, less than 10 seconds to say that story to encapsulate the essence of it. But it did stick in their heads as something that was valuable. So I do think it's really, really important to be able to tell a story that matters and to give the context as to why that story matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find, even going back to, like, when people ask you, how did you get here? I find I immediately think of the story of me getting here. So I kind of see my life as a bit of a story as well.
Yeah.
So I then think back, okay, this happened. So I might, I might tell them what I was doing while I was walking, the things that I noticed, or whatever, if it was interesting. So I find myself thinking of stories all the time. And I don't know whether that's just because of how I was trained, but when people ask me, well, how do you respond in a way, when someone just asks you a question like, how did you get here? I find I think of it, I then look back at that journey, and I remember what I did and whether there was anything dramatic that happened, and then I share that with them.
Is that you practicing the art or noticing?
No, it's not practicing. It's just, I think, as I said, it's like, I think that I see my life as a bit of a story. So I could talk about the ups and downs of my life as one long narrative, almost like a film. And then I can zoom into particular moments. Okay, this is something that happened on this vacation. And that becomes a self-contained story, but it fits into the bigger story of my life, which has its ups and downs and its different trajectory. So I think seeing it in that way helps me to tell stories.
I think that's interesting, and you're also talking about being observant as well, and maybe taking elements of the day-to-day and molding it into a story. And coming back to stand-up, that's really what stand-up is, right? I think the best stand-ups are actually not necessarily very funny people, but they're very observant people, where they're able to tell you something that you have seen a million times, but you've never thought of it that way. And this light bulb moment comes on. That's why there's so much stand-up about planes and flying and airports, because there's such common experiences for all of us, but we've never thought of it that way.
Speaking of stories, I mean, Ted, you did a TED talk a couple of years back, and I heard it was very good, and I've listened to portions of it on the internet. And you clearly are a really good presenter. And you made, though, quite a controversial argument, I think, which was that charities or nonprofits that go to mainly developing countries usually go there with the objective, or often go there with the objective to stay there and to continue helping. But that you were arguing that no, the whole mindset should change for nonprofits. Instead of looking to stay there, they should be trying to get out as soon as possible, have an exit strategy, and get out so that people can manage it themselves. That's fairly controversial within that sector. How easy or difficult was it for you to create that talk?
Very difficult, and it took a long time. And when I look back at it now, I cringe a little bit because I think about how much better it could have been now. But of course, you do the best with what you have at the time. So I would have liked to have tightened it up a little bit here and there and shortened the whole thing, I think. But again, it's very easy to be critical in retrospect, and it's the first time. I think it was very difficult because it's about 10 years of thinking that's condensed into 16 minutes. And as you saw, and it was kind of already discussed, there's story elements of the way all the way through that I tried to put into it. And I think also it is, as you mentioned, it is a controversial idea in certain settings. It certainly hasn't resulted in a lot of invitations to charity conferences after having that kind of viewpoint. But I think it's really important for me to be able to tell my truth. And I'd much rather that than to feel like I can't say something and then therefore the status quo remains. So I'm really happy with where that's gone and what continues to come out of that discussion.
Mm. And there, in that case, tell us how you felt before going on stage there. Were you more excited or were you more terrified?
Oh, I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And I think, people that know me quite well, and definitely me, when I see that, can see it. I'm not sure if the common audience can see it, but I can definitely see in my voice and my body language how terrified I was, because I think, and it's interesting, right? Like, because I mean, I appreciate the invitation to be on this podcast, but I think, like anybody, you're never perfect. You're still learning, and you're still trying to improve. And one of the things is, a lot of it's in the mind. And I remember when I was doing that talk, I was thinking about all the views potentially that would happen on YouTube afterwards, and that made
Mhm.
it so much more nerve-wracking. What I should have done was just play to the audience that was in front of me. There were several
Mhm.
hundred people there. Just talk to them, or talk to one of them even. There are lots of other tricks that I think I could have employed. But again, it's all learning. So the next time around, it'll probably be better.
What was the fear about regarding lots of people seeing it?
I
The
think it's,
repercussions?
well, no, not repercussions in the sense of being criticized, because I'm pretty sure I was clear on what I was saying. And again, I really believe in that viewpoint. I think it was more about messing up the story. And I think about, fluffing lines, or maybe misrepresenting other people's stories. I think that's also something I think about a lot too. And I'm sure you definitely have felt that as a journalist, that you feel this responsibility, I think, to be able to tell some kind of truth in a way that is representative. So when I tell stories now that are relevant for our work, I do check back in with the people every now and then, and I'll say, I'm thinking about framing it like this. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think that's fair? And then often they'll say, oh, actually, and then you might have to tweak it a little bit.
Mm. Were you authentic on stage?
Um, I would say I was pretty authentic. I mean, it's hard to be authentic when you have done 100 rehearsals or something, so it
Mhm.
becomes a little bit learned, I guess. But I think
Mm.
the authenticity in terms of what I was saying, and the content of that talk, and what I really believe in, is absolutely true. And I wouldn't put myself out there to stir up controversy just because I felt like it.
Mm.
Unless I actually genuinely believe that this is the truth, I wouldn't put myself through that. I think that's just wasting people's time. Um,
Mm.
as I said, it was 10 years of being in the nonprofit space, and working and seeing enough things, and then trying something different with what we're doing in Cambodia, with this organization, OIC Cambodia, and then being able to feel comfortable in sharing that story.
Mm. Were you conscious of the need that it's a TED Talk and therefore, to some degree, it's needs to be a performance as well?
Mm. Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think that, you got to know your audience, I guess, as well, right? That's a big part of communicating, is to understand, and empathy for the audience, to try and understand where they're coming from. So
Mm.
going back to that topic that we talked about at the beginning, in terms of when you're communicating one on one, as much as possible, understanding what they're thinking or what they're feeling. I remember this really good tip from someone early on in my career about, when you're talking to someone, there's always a little sign above their head that says "so what" in neon lights. I thought that was really good, that you had to
Mm.
always answer that "so what" for them. And I think with
Mhm.
the TEDx talk, it's the same kind of thing: is why would people who have probably very little understanding of how charities work and how things work in Cambodia, why would they care about this? That was the really tricky thing, because it was quite a complex, in-depth, technical conversation in a way that I had to try to make um, accessible.
And in addition to kind of these more political talks, let's say, you've also shared some very deeply personal stories online about your dating life and stuff like that. What was the where you've really made yourself vulnerable, right? But what was the motivation behind that? Was it some kind of personal challenge that you wanted to kind of challenge yourself to put, to be so revealing about yourself?
If I think social media is a funny thing, and I still haven't quite worked it out yet. Don't know if you have, but
No.
no, it's so new, right? Social media is so new in the scheme of civilization. So I sort of go in and out of periods where I don't use it at all, and other times I'm quite active on it. And I think one of the things about social media for me is about being authentic, is trying to sort of show people that it's not all performance, not all an act, as much as possible. Of course, you don't show everyone everything, because sometimes it's not palatable. But
Mm.
I think trying to be honest and be vulnerable as to who you are, and representing that, And then people are more likely to identify with you and then therefore listen to what you're saying. Now, that's assuming what you're saying is valuable. But for me, this takes a couple of steps backwards. I remember very early on when I started OIC Cambodia, which is the first charity that I started 7 years ago. I remember talking a lot in meetings about the problem and the statistics of the problem. And I'd finish all these meetings, and the first question anyone would ever ask was, how did you get to Cambodia? Or how did you learn to be interested in speech therapy? Or what was it about this particular issue that piqued your interest? And then I realized that they were trying to relate to me. They're not trying to relate to the problem first. They relate to the problem through me. So that's the key thing here, is that assuming that what you're doing is valuable to the world, which I assume is correct, if otherwise you wouldn't be doing it, you have to be able to show who you are and then how you came to being so passionate about that thing. And then more than likely people are going to want to follow and pay attention.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So you've made I've noticed online as well, you're quite open and robust in terms of criticizing people you disagree with and stuff like that. You don't mind weighing into public forums to share your views and, if necessary, argue vigorously with people. Many people are not so, they're a bit more fearful of doing that kind of stuff. Where does the strength or the courage to do this come from?
Usually these sorts of things, I try not to engage in arguments because I think they're kind of pointless, but I will drop the odd comment or make the odd statement here and there. And it's usually when I feel like there's an underdog scenario going on and someone's bullying someone else. So an example might be someone who's, a man who's saying something about a woman on the woman's page that I find sexist or misogynist. I mean, I just can't stand by and let that happen if I see it. In terms of where does the strength come from, I do think it really comes back to that authenticity thing that I started off talking about, which is, for me, it's very hard not to be myself in a relatively unfiltered way. We all filter to a certain extent, I think. But to try and represent myself and my truth and what I really believe in, that's really at the core of it. And then what I've learned is that if you're bland, nobody has any interest in you. If you have an opinion about something, you're going to polarize and you're going to be divisive. And you might even say, that, and many more controversial people than me, of course, but they might alienate 92, 93, 94% of people. But then there's a 6 or 7% of people who really follow them with such a passion that they end up achieving what it is that they want to achieve. So I think about that in the sense of, I actually don't mind being divisive. People have said that recently, actually. And I kind of take that as a compliment. I don't see that as a bad thing.
Now, you mentioned that your charities that you've been involved with, working with children with speech difficulties. What drove you to focus on that particular disability? It seems at least partially connected to the importance of communicating effectively as well, right?
Yeah, there is a good connection there. Also that it's an underdog thing. So I think in Australia, one of the things that we're very good at in this country historically is championing the underdog. And for me, speech therapy and occupational therapy, which are allied health professions that sit alongside physiotherapy that I studied and psychology and so forth, they're not as well known and they don't get as much traction as these better known, better promoted professions. So I do get this question a little bit, which I find a little bit perplexing around, well, you were in Cambodia for 5 years promoting speech therapy, but you're a physiotherapist. Why didn't you promote physiotherapy? And I find that really perplexing because what I did and what I studied has nothing to do with the need. The need is patently obvious that there are no speech therapists there, and yet there are physiotherapists. So of course I'm going to work on the thing that's going to make the biggest difference. So I guess that's where my passion comes from, is that there's just such an obvious need, but really not a lot going on in those areas.
And you've been, talking a lot throughout this podcast about this foray into the realm of stand-up comedy. It's obviously something that's very, very close to your heart. What made you take up such a scary, in my view, enterprise? Did you see yourself, before as a funny person just waiting to kind of get on the stage, or was it even more challenging than that?
Making me nervous, Shani. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned this. Next time I do a performance, I'm going to be so nervous now. I think I did it because it is terrifying. That's the first thing. The idea of your whole job is to make people laugh, is very terrifying. And I remember also when I started giving a few public speeches and so forth, that I got this bit of advice from someone around, if you're not going to be funny, be sincere. They're your two options. So because I was, doing speaking around charities and working with children with disabilities, it tended more towards the sincere side. And then I became really interested in stand-up because I think it's an interesting art and an interesting science behind what makes it funny. And what I've also discovered along the way, and I thought I might, is that there's a lot of crossover between communication broadly, but also professional communication and stand-up. And a lot of the things that I've learned in stand-up are very transferable to communication in the workspace.
And just to compare, giving the TED Talk with doing a stand-up comedy routine, which one is more nerve-wracking?
I haven't had that much experience doing a lot of sets because of COVID with stand-up. But if I had to take a pick, I'd probably say, to be honest, this might surprise you, but probably the TEDx talk, I think, is probably more nerve-wracking because of the fact that it's represents such a long period of time that you're talking about. And, without being too dismissive, it actually matters. That stuff matters. It's like, when you're making jokes about something, does it really matter if you misrepresent the original story? Not really. And I think with stand-up also, you have the ability to...
Sorry, it matters if you tell a joke and it doesn't land.
That doesn't matter. No, I think as a stand-up, people do talk about this quite a bit, that you have to kind of get used to the feeling of bombing, and things not landing, and then walking away and going, I'm still alive, because it's going to happen at some point. So I don't think it really matters. But
yeah. That's interesting, because I would find it more terrifying actually to do the comedy, because there's something about kind of saying, knowing that you're bombing. Whereas if you're doing a serious topic, you can at least say some people might agree or disagree or whatever. But this is like, you say something, it doesn't land, and then you just feel like you're falling into a hole, right? That's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. Well, that's what I imagine it must feel like.
I would say that's probably correct. But I think that you've always got the ability to turn it around. So the next thing could be fine, or you just walk off stage, and then the next performance hopefully is better.
I love that. I love that attitude. I see. I mean, it just comes back to the constant theme of this in understanding you, is that you're very relaxed. You're not gonna over dramatize things, and it keeps you very relaxed. You're letting go of controlling too many factors, and I think that's the secret of your the way that you communicate. That's just my impression.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think that's interesting. But also I think, and very much tied in with what you said, Shani, is I see it as a learning opportunity. I see it as something that I can learn and grow out of. So when I started, and it's only been this year, of course, when I started, getting into stand-up at the beginning, I learned something new about myself, which is that I always kind of wondered what type of stand-up writer or performer would I be? And I've realized that I'm the type that actually needs to be quite controlling, or at least to perfect something and get it right. A lot of people, I think, are more... It's funny that you mentioned what you just said, because I think a lot of people get on stage and they've got a vague idea and they're kind of winging it. I'm not that person. I want to know beforehand, have I really thought this through, and have I got the wording right? And of course, there's a certain element of looseness when I get up there. But as long as I feel comfortable and I'm prepared, then I'm more likely to relax when I'm there.
Do you find that the jokes that you write when they were on paper, they sounded better than when they were delivered? And have you gone back and had to adjust the wording because you realize, okay, actually this would work better like this?
I probably shouldn't be the judge of that. I'll let you to be the judge of that next
okay.
video. But I will say, was it Ernest Hemingway? He said, the first draft of anything is, and then he used the S word. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on this podcast. The first draft of anything is poo, he said. And I think that's really true with anything, but it's definitely true with this kind of stuff, where you write the very first draft and you read it again. This is horrible. But as long as the essence of it is there and you can go back and redraft and redo it, eventually, hopefully, it becomes good. Or if not, you've got to toss it, start all over again.
Fantastic. And what is your style? I mean, are you one of those comedians who does one-liners, or are they more like long, intricate routines?
I wouldn't say necessarily any. I mean, I should really reinforce the fact that I'm still working out my style, Shani. But I would say it's a combination of observational and storytelling, but not so much one-liners, because personally I don't find them that funny. But I think it's that thing about, yeah, and I think some people, I'm not sure whether people would say I'm a funny person. They would definitely say I'm an observant person. And I think that really helps, is to be able to see things and put a slight personal twist on how you see it, and then be able to communicate that in a way that's relatable.
Mm. Wow, thank you, Wei. This has been a very fascinating journey, and I know that anyone listening would have picked up so many insights there from someone who has found at least comfort in their own communication style, and I think that's really what I take away from this. Where can people find out more about what you do, or is there anything you'd like to tell people about what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So they can look up my own website, which is my name, WEHYEOH.com, wehyeoh.com. They can also look up umbo, umbo.com.au. And then there's also OIC Cambodia. Those are the letters OIC and then the country Cambodia. And you can also look up on YouTube to watch that TEDx talk.
Awesome. Since our interview, Wei has gone on to write his first book. It's called Redundant Charities, and it's flying up the bestseller list. I'm pretty sure it's going to do really, really well, and Wei was kind enough to let me ask him a few follow-up questions so that I could help my listeners better understand the challenges and rewards of writing an influential non-fiction book. Wei, what's the key message of your book?
I've worked in and amongst the charity sector for a couple of decades now, and one of the things that I noticed that was quite peculiar was the fact that charities seem to boast about getting bigger. For example, they'll say, we raised 100 million this year, and that's up from 80 million last year. And to me, this doesn't tell me anything about the effectiveness of the work they do, and it doesn't say anything about outputs. It only really talks about inputs. The way that I kind of think about it is it's sort of like a marathon runner boasting about the number of carbs that they've eaten before a race. It doesn't tell us about the quality of the race, the time they got. And a lot of this thinking has come, I think, from the private sector. It's been infiltrated from the private sector. And yet, when you think about it, a charity is successful when it shrinks, when it's not needed anymore. And this is something that I've learnt over the years through my work as a physiotherapist as well, because for a physio, what you want to do is to make yourself as the clinician become redundant through making sure that your patient doesn't need to come back year on year. So luckily there are a number of charities that are working like this, and I term them redundant charities. What they are is they're charities with a distinct endpoint and exit strategy, and they're actually working day in, day out to make themselves redundant. And this is what the book is there to highlight.
And Wei, what did you think was the hardest thing about writing a book from start to finish?
I think the hardest thing about writing a book is everything except the writing. The actual writing of a book on a topic that you're familiar with is an absolute breeze. You could probably sit down and write this book within a couple of weeks if you know the topic really well. I'd thought about this topic about redundant charities for at least 10 years. So I definitely had the structure in the back of my head the whole time. And obviously there was a lot of interviewing and research that had to go into it as well. But everything else that sits around that is really challenging. I decided to self-publish, which I think is a really good tip for anyone who's interested in writing a book these days. Self-publishing as a way to get the book out there is so advanced and in many ways so much better than traditional publishing. But there's still a lot of work that you have to do, and you really have to drive all of that. Firstly, quality control, things like editing, your graphic design, and then of course the actual publishing part of it as well. Then of course there's the marketing. So you never really get a rest, I think, when you're writing a book, because even when you in inverted commas put the pen down on the final copy, that's just when the work has to begin.
What did you learn, Wei, about yourself in the process of writing this particular book?
I think what I learned most about myself in the process was that I really enjoy the creative process. I've done stand-up comedy before, and it's very similar to that in the sense of when you come up with a joke, you wouldn't just test out this joke in front of an audience of 100 people for the first time. You test it out amongst your friends, then maybe you'd work it into a set in a smaller room, then you'd gradually build it up and refine it until it was ready to go into a larger room. And I think that's very much the same with the book. You don't just go from having an idea for a book and writing it, and then the first time people get their eyes on it is when it's published and, is in physical form. So I tested out the ideas in the book in many ways. They were blog posts to start with, and I'd have a look and see what the traction was like and what the comments were like. There was a 5,000 word copy that I sent out to some beta readers at the beginning, and then I had a particular Google survey set up so they could provide feedback, and then another copy, and then another copy. And so it wasn't really a surprise to me when the book was finished in terms of the feedback that I was getting, because I'd already had that feedback in much shorter forms earlier and tested it out.
Okay, and finally, Weh, I'd be interested to know what surprised you most about the whole experience of writing a book from start to finish.
I think what surprised me the most was that it didn't feel like work. When you write a book about a topic like this one for me, where it's very close to my heart and it's something that I was really passionate about, the actual doing the work was not as onerous as I thought. Sure, there were times that I felt a little bit disheartened or less motivated than perhaps I had at other times, but at the end of the day, I enjoyed the process of firstly learning about these redundant charities from other founders across the world who I think are working in a way that's very inspiring and very counterintuitive to the way that charities are incentivized to work. And also, I really enjoyed the process of getting the word out there. It is really true. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's true that when you really believe in your topic, the end result is almost irrelevant. Whether the books sell and people enjoy the book, to me, it's not really that important. That's a bonus. But the most important thing for me was to actually go through the process of writing the book and being able to tell my truth. So I think that was something that I really learned and surprised myself a bit about the experience, is how much I just enjoyed the actual process of writing as opposed to the end result. Having said that, now that the book has been published and I'm getting a lot of feedback about it, it is extremely gratifying to see that the book is resonating already.
I'm Shani Raja, and you've been listening to the Alchemy of Writing podcast. I have several online courses on Udemy and LinkedIn that teach you how to write with the style and flair of the best journalists in the world. For more details about my courses and to gain access to various free writing resources, please visit my website, shaniraja.com.